Look, I've been saying The Last Dance was a propaganda film. I know that was in your notes as well. But when it first came out, that's what it reminded me of. Like, everybody was like, oh yeah, that's why Jordan's the GOAT and not LeBron. Look at that. Yeah, you made a 10-part documentary about why he is so great. I could convince you that Bill Russell's the greatest player of all time if you let me make a 10-hour documentary about how great he is. I could convince you that Gary Payton's the greatest player of all time if you let me make a 10-hour documentary about purely how great he is. Scottie Pippen had to say, saying that it was Jordan's way of making sure that he stays on top of LeBron in the ratings. Look, I don't want to bring up stuff from the past year, but it's a discussion worth having. Is Scottie right?
I think Scottie makes... I'm trying to phrase this correctly. I'll just stick with interesting for the sake of being neutral. Interesting points in his GQ articles, one coming out 2 days ago, one coming out in June. He sounds like a crazy person sometimes. That's really what it is. He called Phil Jackson racist because he didn't get the last shot in one of the games. That's crazy. Phil Jackson, anything I've ever seen of Phil Jackson, he's a stand-up guy, one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in the history of basketball. And there's just no backing to what Scottie Pippen said. But to what Scottie Pippen said about The Last Dance, I agree. And Carson, I agree with you that it's a propaganda film. It's ridiculous. The entire show is literally just Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan. If someone says it's The Last Dance and it's about the 1997-1998 Chicago Bulls, that means it should be about that team. So why are we going into Michael Jordan's childhood and Michael Jordan's college career and the early stages of Michael Jordan's career to hype him up and make him look like this savior to the Bulls franchise when the documentary is about that last season, that last team? It's not about Michael Jordan. At least that's not what it was advertised to be, but that's what it came out to be. And shortly after the documentary aired and wrapped up, I found it really, really funny because sure enough, reports came out that Michael Jordan made $10 million off of this documentary, and none of his teammates made a dime. That's what Scottie Pippen said. Michael Jordan and his Jump 23 company helped make and produce this documentary. Michael Jordan had owning rights to most of the film in the documentary, and ESPN has been sitting and wanting to make this documentary for a long time, but they never had Michael Jordan's approval. But guess when they got Michael Jordan's approval? The minute LeBron came back in 2016 from down 3-1, beat the Warriors in 7. Within that following week, it was reported that Michael Jordan said, all right, let's release the tapes. Because Michael Jordan, as great of a player as he was, and I highly respect him for what he did for the game of basketball, it seems like he has a very fragile ego with how he has to be the GOAT, even though he's not anymore, in my opinion. I think it's LeBron James, and I think the 2016 finals helped prove that. And I think Michael Jordan realized that. So Michael Jordan was doing everything in his power to make sure that he could turn back the clock and remind everybody, oh, well, look how great I am. And it's just weird.
The resume should speak for yourself. He doesn't need to come out and do this to prove his legacy. We know what Jordan did. You're looking at the second greatest basketball player of all time, in my opinion. But it's a sign of somebody who needs to make sure that you think he's the GOAT, that he goes and does this to belittle others and to glorify himself in a propaganda film. That's probably a mean term to use, but that's what it reminded me of. It looked, like you said, fragile. Scottie Pippen called him selfish. This is what he said on Unguarded. You want to know what's selfish? Selfish is retiring right before the start of training camp when it's too late for the organization to sign free agents. Jordan might have been a selfish teammate, and he goes and disses his teammates for this documentary. Look, I don't want to harp on Jordan, but it's just weird right now. And Scottie Pippen deserves a lot of credit, and so does Dennis Rodman, Tony Kukoc, Ron Harper. There's a lot of guys that went into this Bulls team, but if you watch the documentary, you would think it was like the Cavs when LeBron was on there, when it was LeBron and a bunch of role players. They made it look like Rodman and Pippen aren't Hall of Fame type players. That's where I'm sitting.
Yeah. For the preparation of this segment, I went back and I watched the first episode of The Last Dance and I watched the second episode of The Last Dance. And respectively, they're both basically The Michael Jordan intro is the first episode. Then you have the Scottie Pippen intro in the second episode. And the first episode, right before the title sequence hits, when they're talking about the 1997 Chicago Bulls, and they're talking about how this is going to be the last dance, there's a media report right before the title sequence hits, and the last words were, "Is Michael Jordan going to be driven out of professional basketball?" And they're talking about Jerry Krause. Why is Michael Jordan being driven out of professional basketball having anything to do with the team's success that year? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And then you go and you look at it. Scottie Pippen's childhood, his background lasted 20 minutes. Michael Jordan's was 45 minutes. Like, it's insane. It's like all about MJ. I mean, the Scottie Pippen episode, do you know how it ends? It ends with the media hyping up Michael Jordan for dropping 63 on the Celtics. Why does Michael Jordan dropping 63 on the Celtics in 1986 have anything to do with what would happen 11 to 12 years later? It baffles me, because they really do go out of their way to say that Scottie Pippen is selfish. That is an exact quote from Michael Jordan in the documentary, that he thinks Scottie Pippen was selfish. And he was referencing the foot injury, the foot surgery, that Scottie Pippen waited to get because he felt like the Bulls were underpaying him, and they wanted to renegotiate his contract, and he felt disrespected. And if he was already going to be on his way out of the franchise within the year anyways, he didn't see why he needed to risk his body and health and rush back for everybody else. And whether you agree with that stance or not, I don't think it's anybody else's business to say what someone is or isn't physically and mentally capable of doing when coming back from an injury. So going out and just national television that everyone was watching at the time due to the COVID pandemic, and calling that Scottie Pippen was selfish at being it's just weird. And why is Michael Jordan's agent in this documentary? Michael Jordan's agent has nothing to do with that team. It makes no sense to me why Michael Jordan's agent, why is Michael Jordan's mother in the documentary? All respect to her. She didn't play for the 97-98 Bulls. She didn't work for the Bulls as far as I know. Why? Like, they have all these people of Michael Jordan's background. And you didn't see very many. I mean, there's a few family members from Scottie Pippen within that 20-minute segment. But like I said, it's just weird. It's just a lot of Jordan hype and propaganda, and Jordan was this and Jordan was that, and Jordan in college and what he did for North Carolina. And none of that matters to the 97-98 Bulls. I was looking forward to watching the documentary about that team and that situation. And I think it failed on what it was advertised to do.
For sure. If you watch it, it's literally making Jordan look like a hero, and pretty much everybody else looked like a villain. Maybe Steve Kerr was the only guy that, I don't think was portrayed as a bad influence on Jordan the entire documentary. Phil Jackson, there was beef with Phil. Tony Kukoc, there was beef with. Rodman, Pippen, everybody, the GM, the owners, everybody was villainized except Jordan. And I like Jordan, but Scottie on GQ said over the next few weeks, this was following the release of the documentary, he said, "Over the next few weeks, I spoke to a number of my former teammates who each felt as disrespected as I did. How dare Michael treat us the way after everything we did for him and his precious brand?" And I think this was it. Like we said, this was to build up the Jordan brand, and Scottie Pippen took an issue with it, and it's hurting the relationship. I mean, there might have been ties and stuff cut because of this documentary, because they needed to boost Jordan's GOAT status over the kid from Akron. And it's just ridiculous. Guys were pushed down in their legacy to lift Jordan up, and the GOATs should lift their teammates up instead of pushing them down.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. And I think Scottie Pippen has every right to be upset, because as Scottie Pippen pointed out, that team let film documentaries into their practice, into their home, and filmed them for a whole year. And the end product was, oh, look how great Michael Jordan is. That's messed up. You guys can go out and watch this on your own if you want, but there's actually Luke Longley, who was a center for the Chicago Bulls at the time. There is a missing piece, so to speak, of the documentary, and it's an hour segment on Luke Longley and how important he was to the Chicago Bulls. And he himself, there was a brief time he was like, oh, wow, I'm not in The Last Dance as much as I thought I was going to be, because it was just a Michael Jordan show. And I think it's interesting that, like I said, I went back and I watched the first 2 episodes. It talked about how Michael Jordan as a rookie was praised and respected. And then it made it a point that Scottie Pippen as a rookie was bullied by Charles Oakley and had to be taught this, that, and the other. Like, it was just diminishing all the others to raise Michael Jordan up. And I just don't think that that's right. And you talked about cutting ties, and there were definitely ties cut, I think. But at the same time, Scottie Pippen has said that he was never really close with Michael Jordan. I think that he's felt this way about Michael Jordan for a long time, and I think it's just kind of reached its boiling point for him, and it's all just spilling out now.
There's a lot of juice here. I could listen to the tea all day about this stuff. But you think about, like I guess I don't know how I want to phrase this. I would watch a Michael Jordan documentary. You want to make a mini-series on him? I would watch that. But pitch it as a Michael Jordan documentary. Don't say, like you said, this is going to be about the team. It's the last time you're going to have the greatest team ever assembled, arguably, together. They come off that 72-win season. This is the last ride, the last dance, the last show. But it's about Jordan. I like Michael Jordan. I would watch a docuseries about him. But don't tell me it's going to be about the whole team and then make it about just number 23.
Yeah, and I think another piece of what they did, I think this is like the best way that to really look and see how angelized they made Michael Jordan, was going back to that first episode and him telling the story about going to the hotel with his team, and he goes and he knocks on the door and he finds his whole team is doing illegal substances, is what we'll say is what it is. And then Michael Jordan, basically snitched on him in front of the entire world just to make himself look better, I think, and just so he could point out, oh, yeah, that's not me. I don't do that. I'm a lot better at that than most people. I can control myself more because I'm Michael Jordan.